Lorraine let the heavy door of her villa slam shut behind her and released a deep, exhausted sigh. The day had been endless. The online court hearing with Seoul's judiciary had been tense, filled with angry plaintiffs and sensationalist media representatives that frayed her nerves to their limits. Not only was Korea demanding astronomical reparations for the extreme destruction she had caused in Seoul and Busan, but China, still reeling from the loss of several cities, had joined the fray. To be fair, Lorraine had thoroughly enjoyed the process of utterly annihilating those Chinese metropolises. Throughout, Lorraine had argued that no one had suffered any long-term harm. After all, her technology was far more advanced than anything these nations had ever seen. Reviving all the people she had crushed was, for her, a mere afterthought, a trivial act. But these facts carried little weight in court. Instead, her company had become a primary target. Its stock price was plummeting, and the public was screaming for accountability. Despite it all, Lorraine couldn't help but let a weary smile cross her face as she sank into her luxurious sofa. What could they possibly do to her? She knew she didn't really have to worry. Her financial reserves were safely stored in globally scattered real estate and various cryptocurrencies that were practically untouchable. Above all, she was extremely powerful. Her ability to grow into a 200-meter-tall giantess and open portals to other worlds made her an unstoppable titan in this world. Every government knew she could wipe them out entirely if she so desired. But what should Lorraine do? Flatten Korea and China completely? The thought was tempting. She closed her eyes, letting her imagination drift. She could just crush every city in China beneath her feet and wipe Korea off the map entirely, crushing all the people underfoot. That would be so much fun. But then other countries would likely protest more loudly. And she didn't want to provoke that level of backlash. After all, she couldn't just conquer the world, or could she? When she opened her eyes again, her gaze fell on her daughter's pink tablet lying on the coffee table. It was an alluring sight. Tina rarely left her things lying around. Curious, Lorraine picked up the device and turned it on. Perhaps this was the distraction she needed. She opened the browser and immediately noticed her daughter's browsing history. Her fingers hesitated only for a moment before she began scrolling through the chats and messages. It wasn't the first time Lorraine had snooped through her daughter's digital footprints, but she was always curious about what she might discover. What might Tina be thinking about these days? Lorraine knew it wasn't exactly polite to go through her daughter's belongings, but she also knew Tina didn't really mind. Especially not after Tina had once revealed her deepest fantasy. Tina loved giantesses, and nothing fascinated her more than the idea of her own mother becoming the biggest and most powerful giantess of them all. It was that secret that had driven Lorraine to take the plunge and transform herself into a giantess. And she had spared no effort in fulfilling this peculiar wish of her daughter's. Now, it had already been nearly a year since that reality came to be. Now she had the power to become a giantess whenever she wanted. 1 year. She murmured to herself, sinking deeper into the cushions. It felt like yesterday, and yet like a lifetime ago. A year had already passed since she first became a giantess and destroyed large parts of Seoul in Korea. This anniversary deserved something special, and Lorraine wanted to surprise Tina, her daughter, who adored her colossal form so much. But with what? Perhaps she could find something on her tablet or in her browsing history. Lorraine reclined further into the couch, holding the tablet as the warm glow of its screen reflected in her eyes. She had landed on her daughter's DeviantArt page. The gallery was overwhelming, a colorful mix of photos, photo montages, and digital art, all revolving around a single theme: gigantic women ruling over cities, crushing people beneath their feet, and eating people alive. The first image that caught her eye depicted herself in a majestic pose. It was a photo montage showing her amidst a burning cityscape. Her 200-meter-tall figure towered over the buildings, one hand on her hip, while her bare foot rested on a skyscraper already halfway crumbling under her weight. Tiny, desperate people could be seen fleeing in all directions. The caption read, "Giantess Lorraine, unstoppable." Lorraine couldn't help but smirk. The photo montage was old. There were real photos of her in this size by now. The next image was simpler but no less impressive because it was an actual photograph. It showed nothing but Lorraine's soul captured from below, with a horde of panicked people fleeing. The caption read, "Perspective of Doom." The comments beneath it ranged from awestruck admiration to outraged disapproval. Incredible detail. I love how massive her soul looks. So beautiful. This is disgusting. How can anyone enjoy this? She's perfection, the ultimate goddess. Does anyone know how many died in this attack? So sad. Lorraine chuckled softly. The outrage was almost as entertaining as the adoration. Another image made her pause. It showed her alongside Tina, both as giantesses, marching side by side through Busan. Lorraine wore a white t-shirt, long pants, and was barefoot, while Tina had her sneakers on. Both were smiling at the camera as their feet loomed menacingly over the people below. A sign reading, "Welcome to Busan," was clearly visible under Lorraine's foot, though it had been edited into the picture. Even though this was mostly a real photograph, it had been heavily edited to look more impressive. "She really nailed this one," Lorraine muttered, zooming in on the image. As she scrolled further, a picture of Tina's Korean friend Yejin suddenly appeared. This depiction was much darker. Yejin, who in reality couldn't grow to giant size but adored the fantasy to the extreme, was also shown gigantic in this image. She was wearing a traditional hanbok, but her features appeared cold and merciless. In one hand, she held a group of screaming people, crushing them between her fingers, while her bare foot descended onto a crowd of absolutely terrified people. Her soul was smeared with blood, and the scene had an undeniably grim tone. The comments under this image were particularly heated. "Yejin is so cruel. I love it. This is too far. What kind of person enjoys this? Absolute masterpiece. Her expression is so powerful." Lorraine tilted her head as she studied Yejin's expression. Brutal, but somehow elegant, she thought. She could understand why Tina was so fascinated by this dynamic. Then Lorraine smirked. Poor Yejin. She wants so badly to be a giantess, but she can't. Another image showed Tina alone, this time in a cuter portrayal. She was dressed in a Korean school uniform, barefoot amidst a small village, smiling innocently as she playfully held a bus between her toes. The people around her looked like ants scrambling to escape. The final image Lorraine opened made her stop in her tracks. It was a giga depiction of herself, so massive that skyscrapers appeared like blades of grass beneath her. A city sprawled out below, no larger than a rug, as she took a colossal step, crushing dozens of buildings under her feet. In the corner, a casualty counter displayed a number in the millions. "That's ambitious," Lorraine murmured, a wry smile forming on her lips. "I've never been that big before. Is that even possible?" Lorraine turned to the side, the tablet still in her hand. This gallery was a window into Tina's mind, and she couldn't help but admire the dedication and effort her daughter put into these works. Sure, some might find it distasteful, but for Lorraine, it was an expression of creativity and admiration. Mostly admiration for her. What stood out most was that, despite the fact Lorraine and Tina had both caused havoc as real giantesses, Tina still enjoyed creating photo montages, writing stories, and discussing these things with others. Having browsed through Tina's deviant art gallery, Lorraine's curiosity led her to continue scrolling through her daughter's browsing history. Her exploration brought her to a YouTube tab with an impressive collection of videos, all with one thing in common: Lorraine herself as a giantess. The first videos were news broadcasts from the day she first grew into a giantess, while others were clearly filmed from the perspective of victims in Seoul and China. One video showed Lorraine striding majestically through the bustling streets of Seoul, crushing people and cars alike. The camera repeatedly zoomed in on her bare feet, mercilessly smashing everything beneath them. Lorraine scrolled further. There were also videos of her joint appearance with Tina in Busan. In one video, apparently taken by a drone pilot, the two of them could be seen side by side, marching through the streets, crushing buildings and people as they laughed and chatted with each other. That was a good day, Lorraine murmured, recalling how elated Tina had been. Particularly striking were the videos filmed from the perspective of the victims. One recording began with a man frantically trying to flee from Lorraine's foot. The camera shook as the shadow of her enormous soul fell over him. The moment the screen went dark carried a sense of finality that fascinated Lorraine. But one video stood out. It was a short clip recorded by a Korean woman in a big crowd, desperately running from Tina. Tina had been wearing sneakers at the time, casually stomping through the streets, almost playfully. The woman and everyone around her screamed like mad. The camera wobbled, and finally, Tina's massive shoe sole came down from above. The people screamed one last time, and then the video ended abruptly in darkness. Lorraine felt her heart quicken. This video showed just how powerful Tina truly was in her giant form. My daughter is a force of nature, Lorraine thought proudly. Yet, despite all her admiration and pride, Lorraine also had to think about the consequences. She couldn't just grow massive again in a Korean city. Even if her daughter loved that country so much, she'd already caused enough trouble there. With a sigh, she activated the holo display on her high-tech wristband. The device, a gift from Lix, an alien amphibian giantess, offered her an extraordinary opportunity: the exploration of other planets. She scrolled through a list of planets, each with short descriptions and images. Let's see. Desert world, too empty. Water planet? Nah, that's more Lexi's thing. Oh, what's this? Lorraine paused as she came across a planet that boasted a rich culture with striking similarities to Korea. The holographic images showcased cities with glowing neon lights, traditional temples, and an urban landscape perfect for giant-sized adventures. This looks promising, she murmured. Then a wide grin spread across her face. She had a plan. Plus, a few days later, Tina had barely stepped through the door when her mother greeted her with a warm smile. Lorraine looked absolutely radiant in the late afternoon light. Her white summer dress swayed gently in the breeze and her gold jewelry sparkled in the sun. She seemed unusually relaxed, something Tina immediately noticed. It was rare for her otherwise very busy mother to be so at ease. "Come on out to the terrace," Lorraine said softly. "I've got some chilled lemonade waiting. It's such a hot day, and I thought we could spend a little time together." Tina couldn't hide her excitement. It wasn't often that Lorraine set aside time just for her. She followed her mother out to the terrace, settled into a comfortable chair, and took a sip of the ice-cold lemonade. The sweet tart flavor was instantly refreshing. "Ah, this is really tasty, and it's so nice to just sit together," Tina finally said, turning the cool glass bottle in her hands. "This is so thoughtful of you, Mom. What's the occasion? How come you have time off?" Lorraine leaned back, resting her hands lightly on the armrests of her chair, her gaze filled with a rare tenderness. "Well, that's exactly why I wanted to talk to you. I've been thinking," she began, letting her words hang in the air deliberately. Tina raised an eyebrow. "Thinking about what?" "How long it's been since we, grew big together. Our rampage in Busan feels like a lifetime ago." Lorraine paused, then continued with a small, mischievous smile. "What would you say if I told you I was thinking about us doing that again today? Just the two of us. And maybe we destroy a city, crushing millions of people under our feet?" Tina's heart skipped a beat before racing in her chest. Her mother sounded so casual, so matter-of-fact, yet Tina knew Lorraine was fully aware of how thrilling this idea was for her. "Are you serious?" Tina asked, her eyes lighting up. "Of course I'm serious," Lorraine replied. "But I'm not telling you where we're going. That part's a surprise. Just wear something comfortable and we'll be off." Tina practically leaped to her feet, dashing off to her room. Her excitement was palpable. She decided on a pair of long jeans, a purple shirt, and simple flat sandals, practical yet cute. She especially liked the sandals. It would be so much fun to stomp out entire crowds of people with them. When she returned, Lorraine was already standing barefoot in the garden. The white summer dress made her look even more graceful, and the golden accessories added a regal touch to her appearance. "Ready?" Lorraine asked as Tina approached. Tina nodded eagerly, and her mother gave a satisfied smile. Together they stepped into the middle of the expansive garden. Lorraine began to concentrate, focusing her mental powers, and they began to grow. Tina's heart raced with exhilaration as she felt herself expand. The world around her seemed to shrink. Trees turned into tiny matchsticks, their house became a dollhouse. When the growth finally stopped, Lorraine towered majestically at nearly 190 meters tall, while Tina, slightly shorter, was an equally impressive 160 meters. It was their usual standard size when giant. "Wow," Tina murmured as she looked around. "It feels amazing every single time." Lorraine smiled, reaching out to rest a gentle hand on Tina's shoulder. It does, doesn't it? I'm so glad you introduced me to this fantasy and that we get to live it out together. Isn't it just wonderful? But it's about to get even better. She raised her arm and activated the bracelet Lixa gave her. A shimmering portal appeared before them, large enough to accommodate their massive forms. It sparkled with hues of purple and orange, revealing a foreign sky that appeared tinged with violet on the other side. "This is the surprise," Lorraine said with a mysterious smile. "A distant world. Perfect for us. You'll see." Tina stared at her mother, her eyes wide with admiration and excitement. "Oh, wow. Another planet? Just us? No leaks?" "Of course," Lorraine said as if it were the most natural thing in the world that they could now travel between dimensions and stars whenever they pleased. "So, my big girl, are you ready to change a distant world?" Tina nodded enthusiastically. Together, they stepped through the portal, a towering mother and daughter. Together, they were as playful as they were devastating. On the planet Nuwa, sunlight bathed the ancient, moss-covered stones of the Panda Temple. Jihoon, dressed in a simple gray robe, stood on a ladder, carefully brushing dust off the massive statue of the panda deity. The statue was adorned with intricate gold and gemstone details, a relic from a bygone era that commanded deep reverence, at least in Jihoon's eyes. Down in the temple courtyard, Muleng sat on the steps with her arms crossed. Her short, dark hair fluttered in the breeze as she glared up at her boyfriend with a sour expression. "You know, Jihoon," she began, her voice sharp with frustration, "this is disgusting. All this gold, all this showing off. The rich in this city flaunt their wealth like they're gods. And us normal people, to them, we're just ants, something to crush underfoot whenever they feel like it." Jihoon paused, his brush hovering for a moment above the gleaming surface of the statue. "Muleng," he said gently, "they're not gods, just people. Maybe proud, maybe arrogant, but still mortal in the end. Don't see it so grimly." "And yet here you are," she shot back, her voice sharper now, worshipping this panda deity like it has some kind of power. "It's no different from those rich people. Big statues, but behind them, there's nothing but hot air. These gods only exist in your head, Jihoon." Jihoon climbed down from the ladder, ready to reply, but a deafening low rumble tore through the air. Both of them froze. Right above the temple, a massive, glowing portal appeared, splitting the sky open with a golden light. Its brilliance filled the surroundings, and from the enormous gateway emerged two colossal women with dark skin. Lorraine stepped through first, her enormous bare feet crushing several trees on the temple grounds, causing heavy earthquakes in the process. Her golden chains and bracelets sparkled in the sunlight, and she radiated an overwhelming aura of power and authority. Behind her, Tina followed, her sandal descending directly onto the panda statue. With a single step, the ornate relic was reduced to dust, the golden stone obliterated under her immense weight. "Run!" Jihoon shouted in that very moment, leaping off the ladder and pulling Muleng along just in time to avoid the gigantic sandal-clad foot and the falling debris. Breathless, they hid behind a nearby bush, peeking up at the towering women above. For Lorraine and Tina, the moment was just as fascinating. The city of Shenluo stretched out beneath them, a shimmering blend of ancient and modern architecture. Neon lights flickered in the narrow alleys, while towering glass skyscrapers displayed massive advertisements on their facades. Traditional temples like the Panda Temple stood amidst chaotic street markets and futuristic-looking transportation systems that zipped between the city's levels. The giant women surveyed the foreign world with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Near Tina's massive feet, Muleng trembled, staring up at Lorraine's extravagant jewelry. They're aliens! Giants! And look at her!" She whispered furiously. "She's clearly rich, some aristocrat from another world where people have dark skin and are enormous. They think they can do whatever they want." Jihoon marveled at how Muleng could even find words in such a moment. He himself was paralyzed, overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of the scene before them. Their world was being visited by towering beings from another realm, and this gigantic girl had crushed the panda statue underfoot without a shred of respect, as if it were mere trash. His faith crumbled within him. "Lorraine," As if she had heard Mulang's words, tilted her head slightly and gazed down at the two tiny figures with an amused smile. Her eyes sparkled as she lifted her huge, perfectly manicured foot, her toes flexing slightly before lowering it toward Jihoon and Mulang. The two screamed as Lorraine's enormous toe descended. The shadow of her foot darkened the area around them, and the warmth of her skin was almost palpable before it even touched them. Lorraine took her time, pressing them gently to the ground with the pad of her toe, feeling the tiny bodies resist beneath her flesh. The soft, yielding surface of her toe began to squish them slowly. Mulang let out one final, desperate scream before the pressure overcame them, pressing the air out of their lungs, and their bodies finally gave way with a loud, sickening crunch. Lorraine chuckled softly, brushing the remnants off her toe with an elegant motion before stepping back. Those two were the first, and there will be so many more to come, she said with amusement to Tina, turning her gaze back to the sprawling city of Shenluo. From their towering perspective, the mix of ancient temples, modern skyscrapers, and bustling streets resembled a miniature world, just waiting to be explored and trampled underfoot. Tina walked ahead, marveling at the city's sights, but paying little attention to the temple complex she casually crushed under her sandals. Monks and tourists scattered in terror, but many were simply crunched under Tina's sandal soles, their desperate attempts to escape ending in futility. Meanwhile, Lorraine, barefoot and exuding confidence, strolled into to her, narrow alley where merchants had just been selling their wares. Each of her steps sent deep tremors through the ground, cracking the asphalt and crushing everything beneath her feet. The fleeing crowd had no chance. A single step was enough to flatten dozens. Lorraine's bare soles left distinct impressions on the pavement, and whenever she lifted her foot, the crushed remains of tiny bodies could be seen pressed into the intricate patterns of her sole's lines. Lorraine regarded these marks with a satisfied smile, casting an amused glance at her daughter. Tina beamed with joy. Spending time with her mother was always special, but living out such an awesome fantasy together, was beyond her wildest dreams. Her heart raced as she asked, "Mom, why do you like being a giantess? Is it just because of me?" Lorraine smiled at her daughter, casually nudging a parked car with her large toe. The car crashed against a building. "At first it was, sweetheart. I found your fantasy adorable when I saw those photo edits and stories on your laptop. It was really sweet. And yes, I became a giantess to fulfill your dream, but now I've gotten used to it, and I honestly enjoy being one. It's liberating," she confessed, looking down at the tiny people fleeing in all directions. "We can do whatever we want, and no one can stop us." She lifted her foot and deliberately stepped onto a crowded square where hundreds of people had gathered. Under the warm, soft skin of her soul, they were instantly flattened, their screams silenced in a moment. Tina watched her mother with gleaming eyes, feeling closer to her than ever. "I can't even describe how happy this makes me," she exclaimed. As the two conversed emotionally, the streets below were consumed by utter chaos. Under Tina's sandals and Lorraine's bare soles, countless people were mercilessly crushed into paste. Plus. Tunashi sat at his small market stall in the bustling plaza of Shenluo, carefully arranging his wares. Handcrafted porcelain figures and antique jewelry he had purchased at great expense. It had been a good day. The sun was shining, and the square was alive with activity, but suddenly he felt a strange vibration beneath his feet. At first, he thought it was just a minor tremor, common in the region. Yet the shaking grew stronger, more rhythmic, and panic began spreading around him. People screamed and ran in all directions, knocking over stalls in their haste. "What's happening?" Tunashi muttered nervously, standing to get a better look. From afar, a deep rumbling sound reached his ears, accompanied by an ominous whooshing, like an approaching storm. His hands trembled as he saw the terror on people's faces. "Something terrible is coming," he whispered. A deafening crash made him flinch. Turning his gaze, he saw a crowd of people sprinting from the direction of Mount Nuntora, which separated the marketplace and industrial district from the rest of the city. His eyes widened as the source of the tremors finally revealed itself. Two gigantic women, towering far above even the tallest skyscrapers, were coming from the backside of the mountain and striding through the city. Their massive movements sent shock waves through the earth, sometimes even with collapsing buildings in their wake. Tunashi froze in shock, watching the giantesses. The younger one, wearing sandals, had a cheerful smile. She chatted animatedly with the older, barefoot woman, who seemed to take visible pleasure in the destruction her steps caused. The fleeing masses were nothing but ants to them, beneath their notice. Another loud scream broke Tunashi's trance. He turned to his stall, then to his precious wares. "I have to save them!" he cried. With trembling hands, he began packing his valuable porcelain pieces into a wooden crate, but panicked passers-by kept bumping into him. A man slammed into the stall, knocking several figures to the ground, where they shattered into countless pieces. "No! Be careful, my wares!" Tunashi shouted desperately, but the chaos around him only worsened. More people shoved past, toppling his stand entirely and scattering his goods. By the time Tunashi realized his stand was beyond saving, the thundering footsteps were right above him. Slowly, he looked up and saw the younger giantess towering directly above him. She raised her titanic leg, and her huge sandal hovered over him, blocking out the sky as Tina stepped forward. Tunashi's heart pounded, adrenaline surging through him, but he was frozen in place. And he knew it was already too late for him. Tina continued chatting with her mother, paying no attention to where she stepped. Her colossal sandal descended like in slow motion, and Tunashi could make out every detail of its grooved, slightly dusty sole. A deep shadow enveloped the plaza, and then he was stepped on, the crushing weight bearing down on him with unimaginable force. It happened so fast and with such a force that he couldn't even scream. With a deafening crunch, the sandal flattened Tunashi and his stall in an instant. His body burst under the immense force, reduced to nothing but a bloody smear, mixed with shards of porcelain, all pressed deep into the asphalt. For Tina, it was just another step, insignificant and forgotten. But for Tunashi and many others, it was the end. His life was snuffed out without her even noticing. Tina looked up at her mother with glowing eyes. "Mom, could you crush some people just for me? I really want to see it up close," she asked excitedly. Lorraine smiled, amused by her daughter's request. "Of course, sweetheart. Sit down and I'll show you how it's done properly." Tina knelt down, her massive figure causing the ground to quake once more. She leaned forward, eager not to miss a single moment, as Lorraine gracefully hovered her foot over a group of about 50 people, their screams filled with desperation, knowing there was no chance of escape. "Watch closely," Lorraine said with a playful tone as she slowly lowered her bare foot onto the group. Her toes wiggled slightly, teasing the terrified humans before pressing down on them. "I think it's more fun to take some time," Lorraine explained, went gradually increasing the pressure and forcing the tiny figures into the soft skin of her soul. Eventually, every single one disappeared under Lorraine's foot. Tina could hear the cracking and crunching as the people were crushed and popped under the immense weight. Fascinated, Tina observed closely as her mother's soft sole flattened the tiny people beneath it. "Wow, that's so amazing. I'm really jealous of them. I'd give anything to be one of the people you step on, Mom." "That must be so incredible," she exclaimed. Lorraine took another step, slowly crushing the next group of people. She altered the pressure, squashing them one by one, allowing some to squirm a little longer before they were finally obliterated. Looking down at Tina, she smiled. "I know, sweetheart, and, well, you know I'd never crush you. But maybe I have another surprise for you. I'll just need to leave you alone for a moment. Will you excuse me?" she said, casually opening a shimmering portal in the air. "I'll be back in a few minutes, my love. Feel free to keep playing on your own." Without further explanation, Lorraine stepped through the portal and disappeared. Tina stood back up, shrugging her shoulders. What could her mother be planning? Another surprise? As if an adventure with her as a giantess wasn't exciting enough. But Tina couldn't help being curious about what Lorraine had in mind. In the meantime, Tina wondered what to do alone as a giantess. A little unsure of herself, she began strolling through the city, stepping on buildings and people alike, letting the screams and chaos wash over her. It was strange, she thought, how much power she now possessed. Then, an idea popped into her head, something she'd been wanting to try for a while. She remembered seeing her mother eat a few tiny people once. That looked really awesome back then, Tina thought aloud. Maybe I should try it too. With a wide grin, she bent down and scooped up a group of about 20 people. They whimpered and screamed in her palm as Tina examined them curiously. Among them were a businessman in a suit, a family with 2 crying children clinging to each other, a peculiar street performer sobbing uncontrollably, and a few other, less interesting figures. Smiling broadly, she lifted the group higher and then tossed them into her enormous mouth. The people found themselves falling through the air, only to land in a dark, humid space. Tina's mouth! She began to play with them, rolling them around on her tongue. Some slid across the wet surface, desperately trying to cling to her teeth, while others were pulled toward her throat. Tina giggled as she felt the tiny movements in her mouth. "This is so funny," she said, her voice muffled by her full mouth, before finally swallowing most of the group whole. Those who had clung to her teeth soon regretted it, as Tina began to chew, crunching them into pieces before swallowing them too. In her stomach, some of the tinies remained conscious for a short while. They were greeted by oppressive, humid heat and relentless digestive acids that slowly began dissolving their clothes and skin. "That was really weird," Tina said, licking her lips. "It's kind of funny how they move and their taste. Well, interesting." She grinned mischievously, her gaze wandering over the panicked crowds below. "But I think I'd rather crush people underfoot than eat them." Standing in the middle of a wide street surrounded by terrified people, Tina glanced down at her sandals and smirked. "I think it's time to ditch these sandals. Nothing beats walking barefoot." She slipped off her sandals, picked them up, and carefully placed them side by side on the rooftop of a nearby skyscraper. The building creaked under their immense weight, alarming its residents, but, much to their relief, it didn't collapse. The gigantic sandals remained perched on the rooftop, looking like some kind of bizarre monument looming over the city's skyline. Tina wiggled her bare toes with a dreamy expression and grinned as she took her first barefoot step. Her soul touched the warm asphalt, and the sensation of tiny people clinging desperately to her skin felt different, more direct, without the thick soles of her sandals. Even though she'd felt this countless times before, the experience never ceased to amaze her. Beneath her massive barefoot, people scrambled in a panic, clinging desperately to life. But it was hopeless. The pressure increased, and their bodies gave way. Their screams were silenced with a loud crunch. Tina paused briefly and glanced down. The street bore the deep imprint of her foot, an indentation in the asphalt, scattered debris, and splintered wreckage marking her path. She observed the tiny figures frantically scurrying away from the shadow of her colossal frame. What must it feel like to be one of them? She murmured thoughtfully as she continued walking slowly. In her mind, she imagined herself as a tiny figure, standing in awe and fear in the middle of the street, while a towering giantess approached. The shadow of the immense foot would stretch over her entire world, time seeming to slow as the giantess's foot began to descend. Tina closed her eyes briefly, letting her imagination carry her as she marveled at the sensations beneath her bare soles. "It would be such an overwhelming experience," she whispered to herself, her voice filled with wonder. The sharp sound of cracking asphalt broke her thoughts as her foot pressed firmly into the street, reshaping the surface with her weight. Tina glanced at the ground, noticing the wide, shallow indentation her step had left behind. "That must have been a lot to take in," she said softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. A smile flickered across her lips as she wiggled her toes, brushing them gently against the ground to feel the broken textures of the landscape. "I wonder if Mom would have been more graceful," she said wistfully, thinking about how her mother's every move seemed so deliberate and elegant in comparison to her own. As Tina continued strolling leisurely through the city, her thoughts wandered. She pondered what her mother was doing at that very moment and when she might return. The idea of surprising her with her own adventures as a giantess made Tina grin, though she doubted she could ever match her mother's poise and precision. For now, Tina simply enjoyed the quiet moments, the sky above her wide and open, her footsteps creating an odd, rhythmic backdrop. She didn't know what surprises lay ahead, but she was certain of one thing. This was an experience she would never forget. To be continued. This is the first part of the story, Anniversary. Lorraine and Tina are original characters from Cormany Media. If you enjoyed the story, consider subscribing to our channel for more adventures. Don't forget to leave a like, and if you'd like to support us, check out our Patreon page. Thank you for your support.